Okay. So yeah, don't expect to just complete everything at this one time. Follow along, see the framework of the FAFSA, know how it's set up. And now when you start this, you're going to go to the studentaid.gov website. It's always going to be a government website. And you're going to have an FSA ID. So Federal Student Aid ID, one for the parent. Only one parent needs this. And then the student who's applying for financial aid will also need the Federal Student Aid ID. Think of this as your electronic signature. In order to start the FAFSA, you're going to use the student's FSA ID. The whole framework and how this is set up as a FAFSA is it expects that the student is completing this. Even though it's all the parents' information and so forth, they set it up and you'll see it by section. One of the biggest mistakes I think people make is they assume that the parents are filling their section out first. It's actually the student's information that goes in here. So you're always going to start with the student's FSA to begin with. This is what the login page looks like. Now, the reason that the parent has the FSA ID is that you're going to be able to use your ID, parent, to link your FAFSA form with your IRS tax return. So it actually goes into their system. It takes a lot of the information, puts it onto your FAFSA, your financial information that the FAFSA is asking for. So it extrapolates it for you. This is called the IRS Data Retrieval Tool, DRT for short, Data Retrieval Tool. And colleges like this way of doing it. It actually allows for less headache. There's a less likelihood that a college is going to come back and ask you for documentation or verification if you use the DRT, the data retrieval tool. So I'll show you how to do that. So again, when we do this, log in as the student, it's going to be the studentaid.gov website that you're going to use. You're going to see this welcome part. You're going to do accept. And then as we get to this stage, you're going to do the first option. I am a student who wants to access the FAFSA form. Click there. And then the one that we're doing is going to be the one that will be for the school year 2022, 2023. That's the fall of 2022 that your student will start all the way through the semester through 2023. Now, this part will bring you to the save key. And this is, if you don't finish it all in one sitting, which is common, you'll just create a save key so that when you log back in, it'll bring you right back to the original, to the place where you left off in the last setting. So it'll save all your information. Keep this handy. I put that in the FAFSA tips. This is just a good thing because most likely you're not going to finish it all in one sitting. And so you'll come back and restore the session right back to where you left off. Now, remember, as you look at the top here, student information. So right now it's asking all for the student's information. So have you lived in California for at least 5 years? In this case, the student said yes. And then on this option, it's going to give you right here, are you a US citizen? And so it's going to say either yes, I'm a US citizen, no, but I'm an eligible non-citizen, or no, I'm not a US citizen. So whichever one pertains to you, you can go ahead and click that here. The next page that will bring up is the student's education. Now, coming out of high school, you will have a high school diploma. It'll either ask you for it, will you have a GED or some other type of certificate? For you, you're going to go ahead and put high school diploma. And then what college degree or certificate will you be working on? So you're going to put in first bachelor's degree. And you'll see there's a menu of options such as second bachelor's degree, master's program, or credential, or an AA. So we'll go ahead and put first bachelor's degree. And then this will auto-populate for you. So will you have your first bachelor's degree before you begin? It's going to say no. And then what will your college grade level be when you begin? So we're going to say never attended, even if you've taken college classes before. For the purposes of the FAFSA, you're still going to say, because you're a freshman, you're going to say never attended college first year. This question here, are you interested in being considered for work study? I always say yes. It's not a bad thing. You have to be eligible for it. So if you've ever attended one of my past sessions, if you're need eligible, you'll know that you could qualify for work study. But this is a job on campus, very minimal hours, and it can work towards paying down your tuition. Next page will bring you to this where it says student selective service. So whether you identify as a male or female, that's where you'll select. Now, if you did select male here, it'll bring up this secondary question, which is, are you registered with the selective service system? So you can either indicate yes or no, depending on your status. Even if you select no, not to register, now the new rule, and this actually passed recently, it does not prohibit you from accessing federal financial aid, whereas before you had to register with the selective service system in order to qualify for Pell Grants, work study, government loans. But now that's not the case. So this only shows up for male, not female. Student driver's license. If the student does not have a driver's license, don't worry about entering it in here. This is if they do have one. The very next page that it'll come up is the student foster care and parent education completion. So this will be case specific. So are you a foster youth? Yes or no. It'll give you options: middle school, high school, college, or beyond. If you have not completed college, but you've started college, you can still put high school. There's going to be differences in your level of education. In some cases, if you have an AA, you can still put high school. Usually, if you have a bachelor's or beyond, you can go ahead and put college or beyond on this one. Now, in the situation where it's a family, either it's a divorced family or a separation, you're only going to include one parent here. You do not need to include both. So we're going to add the high school when you select California, and then you're going to look for new roads. And then what's going to happen once you do your school and then you click search, it's going to bring up a verification box with a couple schools in this case. So you would select your school, click that, and then click continue. So just be sure to make sure you're doing that one extra step when it brings it up for the search. And then at this point, we're going to start to enter your colleges that you have on your list. Now, for the first submission of the FAFSA, we can include 10 colleges. The FAFSA only allows for 10 schools at a time. Once you do submit the FAFSA and you need to add more schools later on, you could always log back into your FAFSA. Usually I say wait about 48 hours in order for the FAFSA to fully process and send the information to the schools. Then go back in, delete any of the colleges that you need, and then add the new ones as well. So you could either search by name of the school. This is the most common. You can select the state and then put in the name of the school. Or if you happen to know the federal school code, you can just select search by federal school code. Either way works. Once you enter it, like for example, I put in UCLA, and so it brought up all the UCs and relevant schools. But if you target a more specific school like Syracuse University, it'll only bring up that specific school. You go ahead and click whichever schools, and then continue. Now, the next page that'll come up after you've selected the universities is it'll give us the question for the housing plan. So most times, 9 times out of 10, for a freshman, they're going to live on campus. It's usually mandatory from the college that a freshman student's going to live on campus. In some cases, if it's a commuter situation and you're going to live with parent, go ahead and select that like it shows here. And then eventually, after freshman year, students tend to live off campus, like in a joint apartment or a condo or house. And then you can select off campus when that happens, when you renew. Because remember, we're going to have to renew this every year. This is not just the first year that we do this. So now if I go to the next page, they want to know if your child is single, married, remarried, separated, divorced, or widowed. So I'm guessing that most of your students haven't married yet. So we're going to go ahead and put single on this one. Remember, they're still asking for students' information, by the way. And then we're going to go ahead and click next. And then does the student have dependents? The way that you answer these questions will determine whether or not the student is considered dependent or independent for financial aid purposes. So this is case specific. Dependent children, do you have or will you have children who will receive more than half of their support from you during a specified time period? So most cases you're going to say no here. Other dependents, like is the student caring for anyone else? And most cases you're going to say no here as well. Additional student dependency questions. So these would be some criteria where a student would not need to submit their parents' information. And I know burning in the back of one of your heads, you're asking, Trevor, do I have to submit mine or could I have my student apply independently? Or if they have their own taxes, is there a way that I don't have to provide my information? Very common question that I get. So the answer is always going to be yes, parents. You always have to provide your information unless any of these appear or selected. So are you currently serving in active duty? At any point before you turn 18 or 13, or your parents deceased as determined by court, have you been emancipated? So in most cases, this is not the case. So we're going to click none of the above. Again, case specific questions. So student homelessness. Were you homeless or were you self-supporting and at risk of becoming homeless during or after July 1st? So case specific, either yes or no. And then another dependent student status. So here it's going to say, I will provide information about my parents. And then parent marital status. So here, these are the options that they're going to give us for selecting the parent's marital status: never married, unmarried, married, divorced, or widowed. So go ahead and select your specific situation. Click continue, and then it's going to bring us to this page. So this will be the information for the parents that are in the household. Again, going back to the last page, if you select, let's say, unmarried or divorced or separated or widowed, you're still only including one parent. Otherwise, in most cases, if it's married or remarried, unmarried, but both parents are living together, you're going to include both parents on this part. Even if it was a never married scenario, colleges would still ask for the biological parent to provide their information in certain cases. But so if you're in the situation where it's divorced or separated, only include one parent. Married or remarried, we're going to include both. So parent, your social, your last name, first initial, date of birth, and then confirm the email address, because any confirmation emails that are sent through FAFSA will be sent to the student and to the parent address that you put here. So parents, they're asking if you've been a resident of California, at least for the last 5 years, yes or no. Now at this stage, we're going to start answering how many other people are in your household or are under your care in terms of finances. So how many other dependents or children do your parents have? So this will be how many siblings, for example, of the student applying for financial aid. And then this question here is really asking about, does anybody else live in your house, or will your parents be providing any financial support for anybody that's not listed on their taxes as a dependent? Sometimes grandparents live with a family and they have to care for them. You can include that here as well. And now you're going to indicate how many students are actually enrolled in college. So let's read this together. Out of the 2 dependents in your parents' household, as shown above, how many will be college students between specified time? Do not include your parents, but do include yourself and other members of the household. So it used to be where they would allow parents, if they were enrolled in college classes, to include themselves. The formula works into a family's favor right now if you have more than one student in college. So they've kind of caught that as a loophole. So they said, no longer do we want you to include the parent as a student in college. So I know student parents, I love that you're maybe going back to college, you're re-educating yourself, but that's not going to be included here due to the new rules. And so the following page brings us to the parent tax filing status. And they want to know, and this is questioning your 2020 tax return. So that's obviously the tax return year that we're using. So if you've already completed it, go ahead and put completed. Sometimes business owners or partners that are still waiting for like K1s and they've gone on extension, they haven't filed yet. So you can still put will file. Now, if you put will file, you're going to input any of your financial information. You won't be able to use the data retrieval tool through the IRS. If you already have completed it, then we'll go ahead and do the IRS data retrieval tool. So what's going to happen here, after you click on the next page, it'll ask data retrieval tool. Then I would say, yes, proceed to the IRS. And then it's going to ask for the parent who has the FSA ID. That's when they're going to ask for you as a parent to include your FSA ID in order to access the IRS system. So you remember at the onset of this presentation, I mentioned that parent needs to have one and then student needs one. So this is the relevance of that, where you're going to go ahead and include that. It's going to take you to an IRS page once you proceed to the IRS. Be sure that all you need to do on that page is input your address that is on your tax return, on your 1040 tax return. Include it or enter it in exactly as it's entered on your tax return. Otherwise, this archaic system won't recognize it and it won't be able to transfer your information. So be sure the spelling's correct, everything's correct when you enter in your address as it's on your taxes, any apartment number, whatever, and then you can go ahead and it'll give you the option to transfer. Once you've done that, it'll bring you to this page that says you have successfully transferred your 2020 IRS tax information. A lot of the questions from here moving forward when it comes to income, it'll show this right here, transferred from the IRS. So that's good. That means that the system now already has your information. You don't need to manually put that in. Now it will bring you to this window where it still will ask for you as a parent to include your earnings. So this is where if you have a W-2, you're going to reference your W-2, your tips. If you have a Schedule C business, like a sole proprietorship, that'll show up on your Schedule 1 under your business income. Now, I'm not talking about corporations. That's different, but only sole proprietor is what I'm referencing, or also known as a Schedule C. Whatever income you show, then you'll go ahead and include that as part of your earnings here as well. Parent 2, look at their W-2 as well. And usually it's box 1 of your W-2 that you're going to include. Parent additional IRS info. So here, it already shows that you've transferred from the IRS. Basically wants to know how much in income tax did you pay. Now it's going to ask for combat pay. So if you, and this is case specific, so if you receive any type of combat pay or any benefits like that, you're going to go ahead and include that. Scholarship that has been reported to the IRS. In most cases, this is not going to be listed. This will automatically be populated. Now, something I did need to mention, if you have a rollover, so if you're a family that during the year, this tax year, you've taken one of your retirement accounts, like a 401k, and it went from one company and you rolled it over into another company. That's called a rollover. On your tax return, that shows up under distribution of a retirement account. Now, the FAFSA system is not sophisticated enough to know that it, in fact, is not a distribution from your retirement as untaxed income. That, in fact, they think of it as untaxed income. If it was a rollover and it shows that on your taxes, then you're going to go ahead and indicate, yes, that was a rollover. And you're going to enter in the exact amount of what that rollover was. Otherwise, if you don't do that, and it in fact was a rollover, it'll look at it as untaxed income, and that will really make a huge difference adversely to your financial aid. So just be very cognizant of, if you did have a rollover, FAFSA is not able to delineate that as a difference. So you have to enter this in manually. Just to show you, it shows up under pensions and annuities on a tax return under line 5A. And it'll also usually say rollover next to it. Parent additional financial info. All right. Do your parents have any of the following items? So child support, your parents paid. So if the student or if the parent that's going to be entering in their finances, if they've paid child support, then you're going to enter that here. Earnings from under a cooperative education program, very case specific here. Taxable earnings from need-based employment programs. So sometimes parents do have this. If you do, go ahead and enter that in. Usually I say that they don't. Now, parents' assets, this number will deviate from one family to the next. This is not consistent. So it's asking in this case, do your parents' assets exceed $3,700? And that's currently in the bank. So they're asking as of today, as of the moment that you fill out this form. So let's say that you have a huge bill that you have to pay and you know that's coming up. Make sure that that gets paid first before you fill this out. That could actually help you in some cases if the assets are going to count against you. So in this case, it was yes. So their assets did exceed it. Now they're going to ask, what is the total amount that you currently have in your cash savings checking account? And then they're also going to ask your parents' investments. What are the current balances of the investments? Please make a note. This is not including any retirement accounts. This is only including liquid money. So stocks, bonds, checking, savings, CDs, money market accounts, mutual funds, 529 accounts. This does not include the home that you live in. So even though it's asking for investments, note that in parentheses, not your parents' home. So you do not include the value of your home. So no equity in your home is included here.
Sorry, on the line before, when you said include the 529 accounts.
On this one here, you'll go ahead and include that, the investment.
So if you have 529 accounts and you have multiple kids, you're just including the one for the current kid, or you know what I'm saying?
I love the way you think. That's a very good question.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to answer it correctly because
okay.
You do have to actually include the total value of the account. Is it possible that families make mistakes from time to time and only include the amount that's for the student? Yeah. But that's why you can always come back and amend this form if you realize that you did make a mistake later. You can do that.
I also have a quick question.
Sure.
I let some time pass. So I was unemployed during 2022. So can my husband count me as a dependent?
So you'll be do you file the same tax return together?
Yeah.
You're married. So you'll already be considered as part of the household size.
Uh-huh.
So you'll be considered as part of the total. Yeah. You won't be a dependent. You'll just.
Okay.
Good question. And then if you own a business here, if you employ less than 100 people, doesn't matter what the value of the business is, just put 0. I don't know if any of you remember the story of when I was going through this process. This is the mistake that I made here. So I just included all the stuff that they do look at as far as assets, and then note investments don't include. So I included that here for you as well. Now, application was successfully saved. At this point, they've saved all your information. So now they're going to ask the student tax filing status. So again, case specific. If your student does file a tax return, go ahead and include that here. If they don't, then you're going to say not going to file. Now, I'm not going to include the slides under the student section because all of the slides that I just showed you from the FAFSA that had to do with the parents' finances, the exact same things are mimicked under the student's finances. So they're going to ask if the student receives child support, if they pay child support, if they have assets, if they have anything that's related that I showed you under the parent section will be relevant for the same thing under the student. Be sure that you differentiate whatever's in the student account and what's in the parent's account. And then general rule of thumb, I just want to make sure that I caution you before you fill this out. It's always better to have money saved in the parent's name versus having money saved in the child's name when it comes to financial aid. So remember that before you click submit, because they just want to know what's the value of these accounts as of the day that you fill it out. Once you get past the student section, we're going to get to this stage where it's going to give you the FAFSA summary. What I recommend that you do at this stage is go ahead and print this out, or at least save it as a PDF. It's always nice to have the printout of the PDF or of the FAFSA summary. And then it's going to ask you to submit. When you submit, they'll say, go ahead and click here to submit. And it signs basically using your FSA ID. So it's going to ask, do you want to sign and submit? Because you've already entered in your FSA IDs, starting the FAFSA, it won't have you re-enter. Now, the one thing I will caution you about, if you're going to come back after you've submitted it once so that you can update your FAFSA and include more schools, one of the things I do find that sometimes parents forget to do is after they've gone through the process of updating the school list and they click next, they kind of assume that at that point it's done. You actually have to go through the rest of the FAFSA again. You don't have to re-answer questions, but you have to go to the end and submit the FAFSA using the FSA IDs. If you don't do that, otherwise it's just going to stay in limbo and the colleges never get your information. So it just stays there.